was like an emotional roller coaster, you know, like I sent my video off, but I was like so engaged in what was happening, especially when you were talking about props. Because Stefi, you basically had the answer on the tip of your tongue for like 3 minutes, I think. And Cassidy, you kept, I think, nurturing her towards mentioning props when you asked about passing it to the header. And when you said props, I was like, yes, props.
Yeah, as soon as she did, I was like, yeah, she got it.
Hey, Alex from Scrimba here. You're about to watch a fairly realistic mock React interview between Stefi Roska and Cassidy Williams. Stefi subscribes at scrimba.com, meaning she's watched some of the interactive coding courses over there. She's been programming in total for about a year, doing React for only 6 months. I reached out to Stefi because while she's not currently working as a full-time dev, she's been working really hard to prepare and is looking to get her first dev role in the new year. Cassidy works at Netlify as a developer experience engineer, where she's actively interviewing developers. In general, Cassidy has a wealth of experience when it comes to carrying out interviews, so what you're about to watch is actually a pretty unique opportunity to get a feel for how a React interview could actually go. At the end of the interview, Cassidy also gives Stefi some awesome feedback. I want to caveat the whole video by saying that different companies have different interview processes depending on the role. The reasons I think this is realistic is that Stefi and Cassidy had never met prior to this interview. The questions that Cassidy asks and the directions she takes Stefi could very likely be the same questions and directions that appear in any other interview. And on the topic of questions, you're not about to watch a pop quiz. An interview is more like a conversation, and the way that Cassidy navigates this is very natural and really resembles, I think, a realistic interview. I want to just reiterate one last time, Stefi had very little idea about what to expect going into this, and so it'll be interesting to see how she does. Listen, if this video helps you, please do 3 things. Please like the video, comment, say something nice, ask Cassidy a question if you like, or maybe give me some ideas about what questions you have about getting your first dev job so that Scrimba and I can help. Finally, please check out scrimba.com. Cassidy recently launched a in-depth React interview questions course, which goes into the details about a bunch of nitty-gritty React details. This interview, whilst the questions, some of them come from that course, they're very realistic questions. This is also touching on those soft skills, you know, those communication skills, those interviewing skills. Pay close attention to those too, because even if you're looking to apply for a more intermediate or senior role, I know for a fact there's something you can learn from Cassidy and Stefi in this video. Without any further ado, here is the interview.
Anyway, hello. My name is Cassidy, and I'm a principal developer experience engineer at Netlify. And so what that means is I code a lot, and my primary focus is developer experience. And so I work with our marketing teams, our product teams and stuff, and trying to figure out how can we improve the developer experience of the Netlify product for developers. And I focus on React. And so React and Next.js and those kinds of things, I try to build resources, tools, and features and stuff so that developers have a good time using React. And I've been in the industry for a while, and I've done many interviews. And so I've both given and received many interviews. And so hopefully this will be a fun experience for you. Could you tell me more about yourself, what you're doing, where you're at right now?
Yeah, so my name is Stefi, and I've been working for a long while in digital marketing. And I was always interested in coding, but it didn't feel like the right path. So I'm from Romania, and I moved 3 years ago to Barcelona. And when I was in Romania, these things like boot camps or tech meetups don't exist, or I didn't know about them. And I tried to learn coding by doing like a C course, which was super painful, and I gave up after 2 sessions. I was like, I'm not getting it. I
don't blame you.
I mean, in the end, I succeeded. I did the course on C, but it was a different setup. So I moved to Barcelona for like a job in digital marketing. And then I hear about Code Bar and all these communities and Free Code Camp and Scrimba and all these like nice people who want to bring minorities into tech. And everything felt like, oh, it's a beautiful world out there. Come join us. So I did slow steps. And then I was like, I really like this, because also working in digital marketing, you're a lot in contact with the tech team. And it kind of bothered me sometimes when I asked them we needed something and they were like, it takes too long, it's in the backlog or something. And then I was like, what is happening here? So I started to do like small things on my own. And then I felt like I need to commit more and I wanted it to happen faster. So I did like a boot camp where I learned also React. And that ended this year in February. And after this, I was about to go to RC, the Resource Center in New York. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. So I got accepted, which was like pretty exciting for me as like a recent graduate.
That's huge. Congrats.
Thank you. With the whole situation, it was like moved remotely, but I'm very happy it happened. Like it was an amazing experience, even remote. Like what they did was incredible in my opinion. And I did that for about 2.5 months, almost a full batch. And then with the whole situation, I felt like I should get a job. So I joined as a technical solutions engineer. But then I feel more into front end and wanting to code. And that's why I'm here today. So basically that's what I did at the RC. I wanted to go there and experiment. And I was all about, I want to do backend. I don't know why. And then I realized like, oh, I actually like front end much more. And I just want to do this now. So it was a process. And I think I still might change my mind, but now I'm really enjoying the front end part.
That is awesome. First of all, Barcelona is a beautiful city. So that's really fun that you get to live there. That's really interesting that you started with C and back-end stuff. Did you, in your boot camp, did you do front end, or was it kind of a full stack kind of experience?
It was a full stack, but it was mostly, in my opinion, focused a lot on front end because we touched a lot upon React. We also looked at Vue a bit, but very little. But mostly because the time is so short, you get a lot of information, and the easier way to do things is see them in the front end.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with RC, I actually know the founder of RC, and the RC people are awesome. Did you focus, what kind of projects did you focus on? Were they more back-end projects, like I'm going to build some APIs or figure out scaling things, or did you focus on a specific language?
It started out as back-end focus. So I wanted to get better with JavaScript to know like how it works and how to do things and be like really comfortable. And then I wanted to do like something with Gatsby, like create a blog and see how that works. And then I moved to things like trying out testing and seeing how that is. Because at first you're very reluctant, and I felt like, oh, I just want to write code. I don't want to write tests. Like my code is perfect. And then you start to understand when you actually put the time in and create tests that make sense. So I did that. And the great part about the RC is like, it's so diverse that you get to meet also seniors, and you get to pair and learn things that you as a junior, you would not think about some of those things, like how to refactor your code was something that I focused on, how to understand like the architecture and different things. Like I had a plan, but it's just like you go there and then you're like, oh, this is happening and I want to learn about this. And there's an algorithm study group and let me learn about this too. And it was just fantastic. But it started out as backend, and then it went all into front end and doing some of my own small projects.
That's so cool. I'm glad that you were able to have that experience, because that's a ton of experience before going into your first coding job and tech job and stuff.
Yeah, it was really valuable. Like for me, the pairing sessions and getting those is really, it makes a difference. Because as someone who comes out of a boot camp, you don't get to understand some things. Like you're like, oh, how do the components communicate? And you're like, I'm just doing my own project. I'm just gonna put everything in one component and just like, that's fine. Nobody will see my code. But when you start working with others, it's like, oh, we have to actually be more mindful and write cleaner code, and it's a different story.
It does. Yeah, it helps you understand modularity better and scaling even, and all kinds of stuff. Do you, in your current role, do you get to do much pair programming?
No, I was doing a lot of like more support and debugging. and looking at some
Sure.
JavaScript. So it's not a lot of like hands-on coding, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So that gives me a really cool picture of some of the experience and stuff that you did. And so I'd like to kind of walk through an application and figure out how you would build it and then kind of ask React questions along the way, if that works for you. So there's an algorithm in the world. It's going to be a URL shortening algorithm. So let's just say we have a website where you put in a URL and then some long URL, and then it spits out a short URL, and then you can use that and it points to that. On the backend side of things, how would you set up that database? What do you picture that database table looking like, and what do you picture those endpoints looking like for an API?
If the only data that comes in is like this URL, and then what comes out should be like a shorter version of this URL, then it would be definitely one you store this like main URL somewhere, and you should also have like the shortened version of it somewhere after it's created. So I think these two are important. And if you want to do some things, but that I think is more advanced, so I'm not sure about, like analytics to know how many people click on those things, you might want to store this also in a database.
Cool. And so what do you expect, or how would you design it for duplicates? Would you allow duplicates, or would you have something set up for no duplicates?
No, I would work with something like, if it's a duplicate, like I would join tables. So I would create like, because it depends on, I mean, let me think of it, because it depends. Do we have like a user who's like, it matters who creates this URL? It depends also like how we, like if we generate like a random combination of numbers there, it could be that we go back to the database and see like, did somebody enter this URL already? Yes, no. And if they did, like, do we have it in the database? Yes. Then we return, like, we grab something from there and return it. But if we, and I think it makes more sense, to be honest, but I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, no, I like that, because then if we do have user authentication, then you can have a list of a user's URLs and they could have their own profile of their shortened URLs and everything. So let's just say we do have this service with the shortened URLs and someone who has logged in and everything. How would you store authentication data? Just like you have some form and you're going to submit the form. How would you share that state that someone is logged in?
You mean like in the React part or in the database in the backend?
Either one. So let's just say I'm a user and I have logged in, I've hit the login button. As I'm navigating around the website, the page should know if I'm logged in or not. So as I'm clicking around and adding stuff. So how would you store that?
So I would start by having a table with the user profile where they have like their username, I don't know, password, and other things they might add. And then for the links, there will be a table and you would have like an ID and link that. So it will not be like all the links don't come in the same table, because imagine we have different users. So then we link that, and then we go on that path of seeing like, okay, this ID links to this link, and this gives us this shorter URL. So I'd have like a user table and a links table.
Yeah,
and the links table is another table which has like the shortened URL. So let's say if what you asked me, like if we don't give like a unique URL, a shorter URL for a specific user, we would want to do that for analytics purposes maybe, but maybe it works without it also. Then we would like need this kind of thing, like these tables to have like a join table afterwards to see like what is happening.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And so from the browser perspective, from the front end perspective, let's just say you're putting this page together in React. You have a component for the table, you have a component for the form, you have a component for like a user avatar or whatever. What would you do from the browser end to determine if someone is logged in or logged out?
I would use a Boolean to check this, like if user is logged in or user is logged out. And I'm thinking already like the situation with the user is data that we will need across all components.
Right.
So this is something that we should consider, but given it might be something small, we can just pass the data.
Sure. And so in that Boolean, where is that Boolean stored? If you
I would put it in the main app,
okay.
like in main.
Okay, so you have the main app, and I might have you like draw your own invisible diagrams. You have your main app. Is your main app just like that app.js kind of root, and then everything builds on top of that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So I would have main app where I store, like, I mean, because I always think, when I think about user authentication, I really like how apps have this like header, and then you have like welcome and your username. And if you're not logged in, you have like a login option. And this, you see it everywhere. And you have to make sure when you do like the authentication that like the user stays logged in. So if I'm moving from like, I click a button or I move somewhere and it re-renders, that I want to make sure that like the user is still logged in, and this data, like the components know like user is logged in through. So that is important to keep track of.
Cool. So let's talk about this login functionality then. Let's just say you have to write a React hook or some function to make the login happen, to set that Boolean and to get the data that'll be shared across the application. In your brain, how would you set that up?
To be honest, I would like, I know everything is going the hooks direction. And I heard about custom hooks and how that helps with things like, if I would do a class, it's really easy to set like a function which handles all the data from these input boxes. If I, for example, do the hook, then I have to do like a different function for each input box. If you have just like login and password, that's not a big deal because it's like two things, and it's like, it is less code than creating the whole state and everything else. But if they have to register and send a lot of data, which I once did, and I tried to do it with hooks, I was like, this is insane. Like, this is so much. And then I learned about things like custom hooks, but I'm not so comfortable with it. So I would just go like the state version, depending on how much data we have.
Okay, yeah, and that makes sense. Hooks is something where once you get in the mindset of it, you're just like, oh yeah, you just write those functions, but it can be a lot if you don't have a lot of experience with it. And so let's just say you have an API that logs people in. How would you query it? What function would you write? Where in the life cycle would you put it?
I would put it on component did mount to grab this data to call the API from the database and get the data, and actually wait and make sure that I get the data. And while this is happening, I can put the loading or something like this on the UI.
Okay, and so you're getting that data from your login component. How do you store it? Where do you put that blob of like the username, avatar, links, or whatever? Where do you put that data?
I put like, I could send it back to the state, or I could just use the API directly in the component. And like, no, we're talking login and not registration, because I
yes.
Yeah.
I kind of understand that you would understand registration, putting it in the table, but assuming someone's logging in, let's just say you get the correct username and password, you get this JSON data. How do you share it amongst the components in the client?
I would have an API which would actually check and query the data. And I would also like do some evaluation on all this data, but basically I would need something in the backend, like an API that goes and I receive this username and I receive this password. So first I would check, like, does this username actually exist in the database? If it doesn't, then I just return something like user not register, and this data I will do something on the display. But if the username exists, then I will check if like the password they provided matches with the password that I have stored in the database. Well, I would say like it's not stored as a string and all these like things. It should be hashed. It should not be visible, because otherwise we get into trouble. But I would cross-check that. And if this data is correct, I will send a response like all good, response code, I think 200. And then it will update like the is logged into true, and then it will re-render to something else.
Okay, cool. And so for every component, like again, the avatar component, the this, the that, how would each of those individual components, the table, the welcome, whatever your name is, how would they get that data? How would you pass that data to each of those components? Or would they each call that API, in your opinion?
No, because you don't need to call the database so much, because that just, you could, but it's not right to do it. I mean, it just causes trouble. When you do some small things, you might think like, I'm just gonna call it, it's fine. But if you think on bigger terms, it's not fine. And you can use the is logged in, true or false, everywhere else. So that could communicate like, is it logged in or not? Because you don't need to ask the database to do all this work again, because it might slow down everything. So I would use the Boolean to determine if like the user is logged in or not. And then pass in also like the username if I need to put that somewhere visible, like in the header, as I was saying.
Yeah, and so how would you pass that username to the header?
From the app, if it goes down to the header, then it goes as a prop. So it's quite straightforward.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, to passing it via a prop. Cool. And so let's just say suddenly Beyonce tweets about our really awesome service. Thanks, Beyonce, but oh no, now we have to scale. So we have to make our application a little bit bigger. So we have user authentication, but on the backend side, how would you come up with a way to try to scale this as best as we can? And on the front end side, what features would you add to add like the analytics that you might want, or things like that?
If we want to scale, we think of like adding features and making it better because we get more people and giving them more back, or do we think of like make sure that it doesn't break?
Make sure it doesn't break.
Make sure it doesn't break. That's a tricky one because we know most websites break when they get a lot of traffic, and that's like a big problem. We have to make sure we have this bandwidth for a lot of users to come in and do these pings to our database. So we should think about that. I'm not sure how you do this, but it's something to consider, because it's the first thing. Like if Beyonce tweets and suddenly from your like 2 users per day, you get like 500 in a day or even more, then you're like, okay, code red. I don't know what happened and it breaks. Yeah. But I think this is a challenge that I really don't know how they solve it, but I see it happening quite often in the market. And it's something that I should probably learn more about.
Yeah, look up the term load balancer. It's a thing that balances the load across different servers and stuff. And that was more just, I'm curious about your backend knowledge, because that's something that I've never implemented myself. I've mostly been just like, well, we need to load balance that, and then the backend engineers go do it. But I was mostly curious about that. And so on the front end side of things, you talked about passing values down to all of the different components. Let's just say we have a button somewhere that logs a user out. How would you pass that data back up to the app level?
Like passing data from children to parents, like from the button back up, it's a different process. You cannot do it the easy way like props.
Yeah.
And you would do it with the callback function, which is, I feel like it's a bit unfair, but it's basically like the parent components needs to say like, okay, I'm going to listen to you. I give you this like callback function. And if you want to talk to me, you can use it. But if they don't provide this thing, the child has no chance to send anything up. So this is the way you have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I was hoping for that, because that's one that trips a lot of people up, where you're just like, it's just a variable. The callback function is very key there.
I think we call, like for me in the beginning, to remember it, it was like a parent can tell their kids whatever they want. The kids need to know the email address where they say what they want. And the email address was like code for callback function. And that helped in the beginning, because you get confused with like, why?
Yeah, for sure. So let's just say with this application, it's not a single page application. So it's not just the app level, it's happening across different pages and stuff. How would you share your data, or have you thought about how you might share data across different pages of an application? Let's just say you have two HTML files that both have React apps, but they both need the data. How would you share something like that across those?
But they have the same parent, or they're like super different,
They don't have the same client parent. They don't have the same React parent, but they both are part of some weird code base that can call the API and stuff.
If you can send the data from, like if you have the same backend for both of them, then you can send the data from the backend to them. So you have to send the information from one to the backend and then there. But I never really thought about it, like having them not share the same app. But I assume there should also be some library to make our life easier and let us do this, because it should exist already.
Yeah, and so that kind of stuff does exist. There's options, and actually we're at the 30-ish minute mark anyway, and so I kind of did want to start talking about other things anyway. So I'm trying to stay on time here. So for something like that, there's options. If first of all, yes, if they share the same API, they can just query that way. But if you want to share things across different pages and not have that single page application, you can use either a cookie and save a cookie, for example, for authentication and stuff. You knew that. And then
I use it a lot in my work. So it's like, this is how we remember what happens with our script, but like it doesn't cross your mind when it's like in front of you.
Right. Yeah. I don't hold that against you at all. That makes sense. And then also local storage. Yeah. And so
which
not
is used for authentication when you put the token in. True.
Yeah. And so there's like session storage. People sometimes put authentication stuff either in a cookie or session storage. And then, if let's just say there's some other thing, color scheme, some other not important thing, putting it in local storage to share across the app is a pretty common thing as well. Cool. And so I wanted to talk through some of your answers. So first of all, you did great. Good job. I appreciate that you do know generally, like at least high level backend stuff, like you know how a database would be structured and stuff. And understanding that like a load balancer exists will be useful. But overall, that side of things is great. On the front end side, definitely, I would check out things like Next.js and Remix and Gatsby and stuff a bit more to see how they spread things across different pages rather than a single page application at the root, like in a regular React application, because I love using just a plain regular React application, but when you get the really big ones, then you have to figure out how to share that kind of stuff. And one thing that would have been helpful, instead of prop drilling all of the different pieces of data to the components, that works just fine. But if you had to prop drill it down multiple levels for whatever reason, context would have been really helpful there. Because then you can set up a context at the app level at the top or across pages or whatever, and then get the data from that level anywhere in your application. And so that might be useful as well.
So the context API, you can use it on two separate things?
Yeah, and so it depends on the framework you use. For example, something like Next.js, I actually just wrote a blog post on this yesterday, and so I can send it to you. But you can actually, with something like Next.js, they have an optional route where you can put a context around that, and it'll wrap every HTML page that's generated with that context. And so that's how you can share data across everything. And so that can work. And I know Redux does something similar. I don't use Redux as much, but context can solve a lot of that. I thought you did great knowing the React lifecycle, knowing like doing the authentication on component did mount and everything is great. The hook for it is use effect. If you can, if you learn more about use effect and everything, it basically combines all of those functions into one big function, which, like you said, when you experimented with it, that can get a little long. But if you write custom hooks and everything, which again, you said that you've looked into a little bit, that can actually make it nice and concise and pretty short as well. You know your stuff on props. It seems like you know your stuff with the browser and the DOM. For class-based components versus function components, you can use either. I recommend learning more about function components because that's the direction React is going in. The only time you ever really need to know class-based components is for error boundaries, because error boundaries are a thing that are funky, that they haven't built an API for that with hooks yet. And let's see, state, you pretty much checked all of the boxes. And so there are a few little things that I mentioned, but besides that, you answered the questions really well.
No, I'm happy to hear.
Yeah, do you have any questions for me, or do you want to go over anything a little bit more in detail?
No, I think like for me as a beginner, the hardest thing is like to think like the bigger level, because you always build something super small.
Right.
And then you don't think about other problems, or like I would never think like I have two different React things and how do I combine them? Because I'm like, I did one and then I do another one, and I don't have this like thinking behind when I do something.
Right.
But I think that's part of the process, and it's really good you brought it up so I can like think of it more and look into it.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of practicing is knowing what to practice, for sure. And yeah, that's an actual real world example where I used to work at a place where we had, I think, 4 different React apps, separate individual React apps across different pages, and we had to figure out how to connect all of them. And I recommend looking up Apollo. Apollo is a really cool library for that. And yeah, we did the local state thing. We did Firebase. We did a lot of different things to experiment with that and how to efficiently connect everything. Are there any other questions that you have, or any clarifications or anything that might be useful for you?
No, I think it's really clear and really nice because you put everything into like a context. So then it's like you're on the spot and you have to think of all these things and you don't realize the name behind them. So
right,
it was useful.
Great. Well, I'm glad. Again, I thought you did a great job, and the things that to practice now. But overall, I thought you did a great job.
But do you think something like I should look into like frameworks, like you said, Next.js, or more into Gatsby and these things, or focus more on getting like my hands on React and knowing more the advanced stuff rather than jumping into?
I think a little bit of both. First, know the React hook stuff. The React hook stuff will be most useful to just get up and running, because, for example, Next.js is based on hooks. And so you'll want to know hooks because their APIs are in hooks. But also for a framework like Next.js, it is an incredibly simple framework because all it requires is you have a pages directory, and then everything else you can organize it however you want, like a regular React application. So I recommend trying that after you've understood use effect, use ref, and context really well. Once you get those ones down, that's when start experimenting with other stuff.
All right, sounds good.
Great.
Awesome. I think we can probably cut the recording there. That was fantastic, both of you. Stefi, I think you did an amazing job. Well done.
Yeah, that was fun. I had a good time.
Me too.
For me, it was like an emotional roller coaster, like I turned my video off, but I was like so engaged in what was happening, especially when you were talking about props. Because Stefi, you basically had the answer on the tip of your tongue for like 3 minutes, I think. And Cassidy, you kept, I think, nurturing her towards mentioning props when you asked about passing it to the header. And when you said props, I was like, yes, props.
Yeah, as soon as she did, I was like, yeah, she got it. Because a lot of time interviewers just want to know that you know the words. Like saying the keywords like, oh, well, I would pass props with this, or I would use the life cycle method for this. Component did not, just knowing those kind of keywords, then they're just like, okay, they generally know the framework. Because I could tell the entire time, I knew that you knew what you were talking about because you were using it correctly, but it was throwing the word prop out there, and using the word context, using the word state. That's what the interviewer is looking for.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a matter of working on more projects, basically, and connecting all these little bits of knowledge about features into building applications. I think with a bit more practice, you're well on your way, Stefi. That was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought you did great.